This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria and Slovenia are committed to face up to international challenges and to support the Palestinian cause. The participants to the 36th session of the Interparliamentary Union have held the major role played by Algeria and the UN Security Council to stop the Israeli war on the Palestinian people and to allow the Palestinian state to become a fully fledged member of the UN. As the UN Security Council is meeting today at the request of Algeria to examine the situation in Rafah, the Israeli army had pursued its bombardment of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounded scores of Palestinians. Ireland, Spain and Norway today recognized the Palestinian state, joining more than 140 other nations. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. Algeria and Slovenia have signed a number of cooperation agreements in the field of energy, higher education and research, as well as consular relations. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired, along with the Prime Minister of the Republic of Slovenia, Robert Golob, the signing ceremony of several cooperation agreements between the two countries. The signing ceremony took place at the headquarters of the Presidency of the Republic, following talks between the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, and Mr. Golob before being extended to the delegation from both countries. Speaking to reporters on the agreements, of the Slovenian minister had this to say.
We have signed two very important agreements, one in the field of energy and the purchase of natural gas by Slovenia and Algeria, and a second agreement concerning the use of artificial intelligence, which will enable us to exchange even more between our countries, more exchanges to know-how, more exchanges in research, and which will enable us to benefit together from new technologies on both sides of the Mediterranean.
The cooperation agreement between the Algerian government and its Slovenian counterpart on reciprocal short-stay visa exemptions for holders of diplomatic passport was signed by the Secretary-General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Lunes Magraman, and his Slovenian counterpart. A partnership agreement was also signed between the Sonatrach company and the Slovenian company Geoplan by the CEO of Sonatrach, Rashid Hashishi, and the managing director of the Slovenian company. Earlier, the President of the Republic had a one-to-one meeting with the Slovenian Prime Minister Robert Golob. Speaking to reporters, Mr. Golob said that Algeria and Slovenia were committed to working together to face up to international challenges, including support for the Palestinian cause and the search for peaceful solutions to conflicts.
This will only strengthen cooperation between the two states that are truly good friends. Algeria and Slovenia, as non-permanent members of the Security Council, worked together a lot over the past few months. Today we discussed with the President the horrific situation in Gaza and the need to support Palestine, but we also talked about many other challenges on the international stage and the possibilities for peaceful solutions. Freedom is truly the fundamental value at the international level, which must also allow for the self-determination of the peoples of nations, both for Palestine and for Western Sahara. And we agreed that the will for freedom must be on the basis of our work together in New York, within the framework of the United Nations Security Council, and those are the things that unite Algeria and Slovenia.
The Slovenian Minister Robert Golob wound up yesterday his visit to Algeria. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Hattaf, is in Beijing, China, under the instruction of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, to participate in the 10th Ministerial Meeting of the Arab-Chinese Cooperation Forum. The ministerial meeting will coincide with the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Arab-Chinese Cooperation Forum, thus forming an opportunity to evaluate the journey of the partnership between the two sides over the past 2 decades, as well as to discuss ways and prospects for strengthening this partnership in its various political, economic, social and cultural dimensions. The participants to the 36th session of the Interparliamentary Union have hailed the major role played by Algeria at the UN Security Council to stop the Israeli war on the Palestinian people and to allow the Palestinian state to become a fully fledged member of the UN. In the so-called Declaration of Algiers issued at the end of their two-day meeting, the participants praised the genuine role played by Algeria under the chairmanship of President Tebboune to try and put an end to the genocidal war the Palestinian people is confronted to. In a message read by the UN Secretary-General Fayez Rabka, the Arab representatives expressed their deep gratitude to the head of state for the interest granted to the Arab nations' questions and for his efforts to achieve progress and development for all the Arab and the Arab peoples. Evoking the Palestinian question he considered fundamental for the Arab nation, the UN Secretary-General Fayez Rabka had the following.
I reiterate that the Palestinian issue will remain the central issue of the Arabs, Muslims and Christians until the end of time, despite the Zionist acts of aggression, increased segregation and desperate attempts aimed at uprooting the Palestinian people. We reiterate our support to the fulfillment of the Palestinian legitimate rights to freedom and independence and to set up a Palestinian sovereign state. We also reiterate our support to the refugees' return and to the granting of compensations to the Palestinian refugees. We call on the international community and all the regional and international parliamentary unions to unite to raise the voice of the Palestinians to put an end to their sufferings by imposing an immediate ceasefire.
Addressing the meeting earlier, the Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Ibrahim Boughali, emphasized that much remained to be done by the Arab Parliament to back the Arab action in order to fulfill the aspirations of the Arab peoples.
The Arab parliaments are requested to reinforce their action to adapt to such sacrifices. Algeria, under the chairmanship of President Tebboune, is deploying major efforts at the UN Security Council in its capacity as non-permanent to defend the Palestinian issue, which is and has always been a major issue for Algeria. We aspire, after presiding over the Union's meeting, to find another mechanisms to all the Arab parliaments to play a role so that the Arab parliamentary common action could contribute to meet the aspirations of the Arab people.
The Speaker of the National Assembly once again reiterated Algeria's constant and inalienable support to the Palestinian issue, which President Tebboune has stated as a fundamental parameter of the country's foreign policy. Let's recall that President Tebboune has been awarded the Parliamentary Excellency Prize by the Arab Interparliamentary Union. And now more news with my colleague Jamil Sinmani. Over to you, Jamil.
Yes, Mariam. The Minister of Health, Mr. Abdelhak Saihi, has stressed in Geneva, Switzerland, the efforts made by Algeria to promote its health system by placing the patient at the heart of all reforms in the sector and extending the local health coverage. During the 77th session of the General Assembly of the World Health Organization, WHO, Mr. Saihi highlighted Algeria's efficient strategy to promote its health system by extending local health cover, such as bringing a number of health units closer to populations outside the major cities as part of the Patient Action Plan, which includes 28 objectives and 143 health activities defined over time. The minister said that all actions taken by Algeria are part of sustainable development programs set on the 2030 agenda in accordance with the instructions of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, who attaches a great importance to the health sector. The health minister met outside the 77th session of the General Assembly of the World Health Organization, which his Cuban counterpart, Mr. José Ángel Portal Miranda, to discuss continued coordination to promote bilateral relations. The two sides also discussed ways of strengthening cooperation, notably regarding the implementation of the agreement and the strengthening of the Cuban medical team in Algeria, particularly in the specialties of radiology, intensive care and ophthalmology. As you followed in our top stories, Ireland, Spain and Norway today organized or recognized the Palestinian state. joining more than 140 other nations. Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide called on the international community to work toward a two-state solution while praising the Palestinian Authority for working on reforms and faulting the Israeli government for showing no signs of engaging constructively. For his part, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said that recognizing a Palestinian state is aimed at contributing to achieving peace.
With this decision, Spain joins the more than 140 countries that already recognize Palestine. This is a historic decision that has a single goal: to contribute to achieving peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It is the only way to realize the solution that we all recognize as the only possible one to achieve a future of peace, that of a Palestine state that coexists alongside the state of Israel in peace and security. The state of Palestine must be viable, with the West Bank and Gaza connected by a corridor and with East Jerusalem as its capital, and must be unified under the legitimate government of the Palestine National Authority. It is also essential that Palestine finds its adequate place in the international community. That is why Spain will continue to support efforts to strengthen Palestine's presence in international organizations.
That was Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Let's recall that Spain, Norway and Ireland first announced their intention to recognize the Palestinian state last week. As the UN Security Council is meeting today at the request of Algeria to examine the situation in Rafah, the Israeli army has pursued its bombardments of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. Palestinian sources said that at least 46 people were killed and 110 others wounded in the bombardments, which targeted several parts of the enclave, including Gaza and Rafah. This came in the wake of the killing of scores of Palestinians in a blaze that broke out after a displaced camp was hit by an Israeli attack. The attack that caused those displaced who sought refuge in Rafah to flee the area was denounced by the Director General of UNICEF, who rejected as unacceptable the images of the family members and children who were burned to death. In this respect, the UN Security Council will be holding an emergency meeting at the request of Algeria to examine what steps to take in the face of the atrocity perpetrated in Rafah. The attack triggered off condemnations, notably by Canada and China, which called for the enforcement of a humanitarian ceasefire and reiterated their support to the Palestinian people. South Africa, for its part, today condemned as a new deplorable and brutal attack carried out by the Israeli army against civilians in Rafah. This came as protests were staged today, or notably in Spain, France and the United States, to denounce the attack on Rafah.
The international event of the week.
A major event this week was the announcement made by Ireland, Norway and Spain that they will formally recognize a Palestinian state as from May 28th. Norway was the first to announce its decision, hailed by Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store as an investment in the only solution that can bring a lasting peace in the Middle East, in a reference to the two-state solution, providing for a peaceful coexistence between the Israelis and the Palestinians. In a similar move, Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris said the move was aimed at stating clearly Ireland's unambiguous support for the equal right to security, dignity and self-determination for the Palestinian and Israeli peoples. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, for his part, said the move was aimed at speeding up efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and contributing to bring other European countries to follow suit. Asked about how significant the recognition of the State of Palestine by Spain, Norway and Ireland is, as the three countries argue that setting a political horizon was the only way of reaching a sustained solution to the current crisis, our political analyst Helmut Salhe had this to say.
This is a huge accomplishment because these countries are traditional friends of the Zionist states. It means they have grown extremely frustrated with Israel's colonial policies, and further, it means that other countries will follow course. The leaders of the three states are also on record stating that they are determined to keep the two-state idea alive and would not allow this idea to be destroyed by force. meaning that Israel destroying it. In this instance, this keeps also the narrative alive in the media, adding credence to the Palestinian legitimate right to statehood. It is also a diplomatic victory and a moral lift to the Palestinians who have been fighting to achieve nationhood. It comes at the right time in a week when the International Criminal Court requested arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister and his defense minister, and the International Court of Justice issuing ruling demanding Israel to hold its military operation in Rafah, among other things.
Ireland, Spain and Norway's recognition of the Palestinian state was hailed by the Palestinian Authority as a translation for the three European countries' unwavering support to, as it put it, delivering the long overdue justice to the Palestinian people. Although the recognition of the Palestinian state, already endorsed by several European countries in 1988 and by Sweden in 2014, was described as historic by some countries, others considered the move premature. Some EU members, including France and Germany, questioned the issue, saying that it was not the right time, though they affirmed that they are not opposed to the principle of the two-state principle. This joined the US stance reiterated this week by President Biden, who said that he believed that a Palestinian state should be the result of direct negotiations. Asked if, regardless of the US position, could the recognition of a Palestinian statehood help drive momentum towards a political settlement at a time when the Palestinians are witnessing the darkest chapter of their history, our political analyst Hamad Salhi had the following.
On the surface, France is not opposed to the idea of a Palestinian state, but it comes with conditions in a sense. The French president and his foreign minister have said as recently as last week that the recognition of Palestine is not a taboo, a position that speaks to the inevitability of such a recognition. But France and Germany have also stated that this is not the right time, to which perhaps Great Britain could be responding with its own position, stating that the recognition of a Palestinian state does not have to be at the end of a process, referring to the peace negotiations and the current situation in Gaza. Britain seems to believe that they could announce statehood in any time it sees it good for them. It's clear that both France and Germany are trapped under the Israeli lobby and the United States. Their positions are also aligned with the Israeli grand strategy to strip Palestinians from their international rights by making it conditional to their approval and through a peace process and under the auspices of the United States. But the United States' approach to peace in the Middle East has been one-sided, and it is difficult to imagine United States to play fair when it is an integral part of this genocide in Gaza. But more so, the United States does not advocate for a viable sovereign state for Palestinians. Rather, it calls for a limited form of governing under which Israel will have full control. All to say that when France and Germany, along with the United States, speaking of the right time, they are not only endorsing the ongoing atrocities in Gaza by not taking a stand against Israel, but also they are playing in the hand of the Israeli lobby in the United States. Likely, states like Norway, Spain, and Ireland are setting the way forward. Their position is already building momentum for others to follow course.
Arrest warrants are to be issued by the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, ICC, Karim Khan, against the Israeli Prime Minister for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The charges also facing the Israeli defense include the starvation of civilians as a weapon of war, murder, extermination, and intentional attacks on civilians. The announcement was made this week at The Hague by the ICC's chief prosecutor, who reiterated that no one can act with impunity, while stressing that applying international law selectively would create the conditions for its collapse. Asked about the impact of the ICC's decision on the Israeli occupying authorities, which said that they denied the court's authority, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
This ruling is devastating for the Israelis and their leaders. It is the highest condemnation and the most severe against an Israeli leader and the Zionist states. By international law, the Israeli leaders are now expected to appear before the International Criminal Court and be arrested. Should they fail to do so, they run the risk to be arrested wherever in the world. To bring those responsible for the Palestinian, with the genocide committed against the Palestinians and hold them accountable before the law is rendering justice, albeit partially, to the Palestinians. The impact also one could bring to say is that the decision further isolates Israel internationally, particularly with the wave of support and solidarity of the Palestinians. Additionally, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, by doing so, will have established documents of the genocide, of the activities that Israel portray or have portrayed against the Palestinians. This is a historical document that will be seen by generations after generation. And it is in the context that the actions taken by ICC and ICJ are also seen as doing the right thing and put in place international law above anything else, and most importantly, bringing Israel to justice. This is in itself a first, and particularly when we look at what's happening today, where the world community is standing, doing nothing to stop Israel from committing genocides day after day.
Let's recall that the EU diplomacy chief, Joseph Borrell, urged certain governments, including the Israeli government, not to threaten or intimidate the ICC's judges, calling for the respect of the UN's top court.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. This is the English service. With more news, the fifth meeting of the Joint Algerian-French Commission on History and Remembrance called for tangible measures to take into account all the dimensions of the history of the colonial period. The French side of the Joint Commission of Historians warmly thanked their Algerian counterparts in the various institutions they met for their welcome and the presentation of their rich collections during their visits, noting that the Joint Algerian-French History and Remembrance expressed the wish that the handling of the remembrance file should meet the aspirations of the Algerian and French peoples. In this regard, the Algerian side invited the French side to convey its concerns regarding the restitution of cultural property, adding that the French side accepted and undertook to forward to President Emmanuel Macron the list presented by the Algerian side so that any property that can be returned to its country of origin as quickly as possible. Mariam Barshi tells us more.
The Minister of Trade and Export Promotion, Mr. Tayyip Zitouni, has called in the northeastern city of At-Tarf in the economic operators participating to the first national Algerian products show to examine the possibility of setting up a tripartite council of Algerian, Tunisian and Libyan businessmen to strengthen the economic relations between the three sister countries. Mr. Zitouni stressed during a meeting with economic operators from the eastern provinces of Al-Tarf and Annaba and businessmen from Tunisian governorates and their Libyan counterparts that the tripartite council will be a platform to help to create a business climate and boost direct and indirect investment opportunities in each country. The platform would also be an efficient mechanism to promote trade and while intensifying the organization of conferences and exhibitions to forge fruitful partnerships and promote trade and economic exchanges that will benefit the three countries. The minister added that its department was working on the creation of a working group whose main task is to take and monitor measures to overcome the difficulties hampering the movement of goods between the three countries and to explore means of increasing the volume of trade while spinning up the establishment of joint free trade areas. And now a memorandum of understanding was signed here in Algiers between the National People's Assembly and the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament. The memorandum was signed by the Speaker of the APN, Mr. Brahim Boughali, and the Speaker of the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, Mr. Ronaldo González Patricio, at the Abdelatif Rahel International Conference Center. During the discussions that preceded the signing, Mr. Boughali emphasized the importance of the memorandum, highlighting its role in establishing a roadmap for optimum cooperation between the two parties. Now a reminder of today's top stories. Algeria and Slovenia are committed to face up to international challenges and to support the Palestinian cause. The participants to the 36th session of the Interparliamentary Union have hailed the major role played by Algeria at the UN Security Council to stop the Israeli war on the Palestinian people and to allow the Palestinian state to become a fully fledged member of the UN. As the UN Security Council is meeting today at the request of Algeria to examine the situation in Rafah, the Israeli army has pursued its bombardments of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. Ireland and Spain and Norway today recognized the Palestinian state, joining more than 140 other nations. Stay tuned on Radio Algeria International.